Belmont is a mental health titan with over 40 years of experience. Her new book, 110 CBT Tips and Tools, drops bombs on anxiety and depression, giving you the ultimate guide to conquering your mind. Judy, thank you so much for being with us today and welcome to the process.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I have been very outspoken about my trauma. My big T happened in my adult life, and I am learning and discovering how important mental health is. And part of my healing was needing that control back. And when I figured out that even though I did not make the decision of what caused my trauma, but it is now my responsibility and I get to control it. So I would like to ask you first, if you don't mind, what is your relationship to trauma and your experience with trauma?
Professionally, I was a therapist for over 40 years, and I actually do some mental health coaching online. And I have been amazed at how many people have experienced trauma. And trauma comes in all shapes and sizes. A lot of people would say, I know so many people have it worse than me, so I shouldn't be upset about it. And I said, never compare your trauma to anybody else. My belief is most people have some trauma. And it's really how you deal with it and how you move on, but it also might explain some behavior that you do that you don't understand. I see this client now who I saw in private practice, and I still continue online with her with mental health coaching because I don't have a license anymore now that I'm retired. And it has been amazing for her to realize the trauma that she has gone through explains some of her behaviors now with getting upset with her kids or with other people in her life and what gets triggered. And I have more and more appreciation of how trauma has shaped people for good and not good,
Yeah.
because it's made her an extremely empathetic, deep, caring person. It's extremely insightful and extremely amazing.
Yeah. One of the things that I had to learn the hard way is to not compare trauma. There was a situation where I was speaking to a gentleman and my story was public. And so he was letting me know that he knew about my story and that he related because his dad and sister was in a car accident. And the dad had no injuries and the sister broke her thumb. And so he was comparing that, quote unquote, is how I was at least taking it, to my trauma where someone sexually assaulted me and turned themselves in for murder.
Yeah.
And so I was livid at that. And luckily, I had therapy that day. So I go in there hot and mad. I'm talking to my therapist about it. I was like, shame on this man. How dare this guy say he relates to me because his sister has a broke thumb? And my therapist was like, what if that was traumatic? What if that was his trauma? We cannot compare them. And it was just a huge lesson that I learned. And then as I've been working in the mental health field now, so many people will say that they don't have trauma. And I find it a lot with men, right? They're like, I haven't experienced trauma. And then you can ask a few questions and they're like, my mom was bipolar. My dad was an alcoholic. So both of them were absent in my life. I'm like, that's trauma. That's trauma. That's traumatic. But we as a society want to say that that's just everyday America.
Exactly.
So
I think often trauma is abuse, and obviously that is traumatic.
sure.
But trauma doesn't have to be abuse, or it doesn't have to have anything with abuse. It could be dysfunction. It could be just unhealthiness, a lot of anxiety in the family. There's so many ways because we all have different levels of sensibilities and sensitivities.
Yeah.
So what is traumatic for one person in the same family might not be as traumatic to another.
Yeah. That actually might be the answer to that question I wanted to ask you. I'm going to go ahead and ask it anyways, just to make sure that this would be your answer, or if you have something else you want to add to it. What 40 years of working in the mental health field, you've seen so much progression, I'm sure. What would you think is a misconception that you've encountered with mental health that you would like to maybe debunk?
One thing that has always struck me is people would see going to a therapist as a sign of weakness, and I always saw it as a sign of strength because there's a lot of people who are in denial of their need, and some people who need the therapist the most aren't the ones in therapy.
Right.
And often my clients would kid that I have this like dysfunctional situation of the family or marriage or whatever. Why am I in therapy? And I said, because you're the one who wants to get healthier and separate. It doesn't mean you're the weak one or you're the sick one. Sometimes you need to heal from a sick situation or unhealthy situation, and that could be a sign of strength. So that is one thing that has really always amazed me, that it's often the healthier people that come to therapy.
Yeah, I still go to therapy every Wednesday, and I'm a part of a sexual assault group therapy for men that we go to, that we do every Wednesday. And even when I'm at my highest and having the best of time, I still go because I don't believe in the word cured when it comes to mental health and trauma, but I believe in healing. But I think it's like a garden. You have to continue to water that garden. If I think, oh, I'm cured from my trauma, there could be something that could trigger it out of nowhere one day. I've got to maintain it. I've got to water that garden. And I do that. I could be having the best 3 weeks of my life and it's Wednesday or Thursday, and my ass is still in therapy. That's how I water my garden.
Um, I often said to my clients, the best time to really get something out of therapy is when you're feeling better,
Yeah.
because then you're able to be more objective and learn the lessons that you need to learn. So it's not just when you're feeling bad, it's when you're feeling good and can regroup. And when I was promoting some of my other books in the past on Facebook and LinkedIn, unfortunately, my Facebook page of 185,000 followers were stolen from me, and I don't have any recourse. I can't get it back, and there's no customer service that I can get in touch with. I fell for a scam. I shared my screen with someone I thought was prepping me for an interview, and they stole my page. So I lost that. But when I used to I did a lot of inspirational posts, maybe 5 to 10 years ago. One of the most shared, we're talking about thousands and thousands of shares, 10, 20,000, 30,000, a lot of the shares, was this post that I had with the bridge with flowers on the other side under the bridge. And it said, there's some things in life we never get over, we just get through. And it will still be beautiful on the other side. And I like that because you don't ever really get over trauma. It's something you get through, and it might make you deeper instead of weaker.
And it's interesting, I guess, is the best word to use, that I'm in a place now with my life and the control that I've taken with my trauma that I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't ask for it. I would never
Right.
wish it upon anyone, but I found a way to turn the ugliest thing that's happened to me into something beautiful, which means it's not so in vain.
Awesome. I have always been amazed at how many people have told me that they wouldn't have traded it. Not that they wished it on themselves, but they wouldn't have traded it because now they like who they are.
Yeah.
And even people who have trouble with self-esteem still have an appreciation of how more empathetic they are, how deeper they are, and richer and more committed they are to whatever cause. So I've always been really very amazed by that. And that speaks to me about the resiliency of people, and that people don't want to stay victims, but they want to be victors. And I often think of that when people think in victim language, that this person did this to me, he made me so mad, just like you could have thought that from that guy who said that to you, comparing the traumas. But you have the ability to decide and choose how you want to react to that trigger. And it's interesting information, and it makes you realize how far you've come.
Yeah, absolutely. I love to, especially having this podcast. I've had it for 3 years now. And
Yeah.
I like to even sometimes go back to the beginning because I can even see the growth in just my healing in those 3 years as well. And it's very empowering. And I just, like we said, I would never wish this upon anyone. But the moment that I realized that I now control my healing and how I move forward was very empowering. And I saw this quote one time, and I probably won't say it correctly, but I think I can say enough for you to get the gist of. But it said, "Don't tell me that what happened to me made me strong. I was already strong, and that's how I got through what happened to me."
Oh, that's very nice. I like that.
I really liked that because I found myself unsettled when people would say, "My gosh, you've just become so strong," or "What made you strong?" There was that part of me that didn't know how to articulate it until I read that quote. But there was that part of me that was like, but obviously I already was because I got through it. There could have been an easier out. There could have been a way for me to find a way to numb the sting. And I fought through all that. I know so many people that unfortunately went through something that I went through, sometimes worse than what I went through, that went to drugs and alcohol, sometimes suicide. And I did it. And I think there's a lot of strength that comes with that because there are times that could have been the easy way.
There's a saying, and that's one of the tips in my book, is post-traumatic stress to post-traumatic growth. And I think that what you're describing is post-traumatic growth. And so many times, if people aren't aware of how the trauma has impacted them, they end up either denying it or not dealing with it or taking drugs or alcohol, just the kinds of things that you mentioned. But by facing it and being resilient, it leads to growth.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would like to ask you the flip side of the question I asked you a few moments ago is in your 40 years of experience, can you tell us about a time that you really noticed a change in the growth and to where maybe the stigmas started to get watered down a little bit
The growth of my clients.
of mental health
Oh,
and
mental health.
therapy and people just acknowledging it?
I don't think there's any turning point. I think it's an evolution. I have a master's in clinical psychology. That was in the 70s. And then things were not like they are now. There was not as much understanding about trauma. There wasn't as much understanding about things that we know now. And so in my 40 plus years of experience, it all evolved. And I learned about CBT, which is the topic of my latest book. But I've also learned a lot about other modalities such as DBT, dialect behavior therapy, ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. They all have CBT as a cornerstone, but they also extrapolate a little bit more in some areas such as mindfulness. So it's been an evolution in the mental health, my awareness of it. And I think that it just is amazing how certain things are so apparent to me now that I didn't know back 20, 30 years ago.
Mm,
I didn't understand about effects of trauma until I saw so many people go through it. And maybe back 40 years ago, I thought, hey, that happened. What are you going to do? Not
right.
that I would say that to someone, but in my mind, I don't know how to deal with that one. That's past. Now I would have many things to say because I've evolved also. I've matured and I know differently. And the other thing that I know now that I didn't know as much before is that self compassion is the new self esteem.
Mm,
And there's been a lot of focus on mental health equating with self-compassion because we often talk to ourselves like we would never talk to anybody else. So when we're coping with things, a lot of times we end up being very judgmental to ourselves. We might call ourselves names. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. That was so stupid. But you wouldn't tell that to your best friend. I have become more sensitive and more intuitive about when people don't have self-compassion, what happens. And I see it in action, just even in people that I know in general, and people who can practice it.
yeah. Yeah, you're 100% correct. I can't say that I'm perfect at it yet or that I ever will be, but something that I'm putting into motion with myself is when I'm having those irritated moments just with me. And I ask myself when I'm talking to myself and thinking these things, I ask myself if I was at a restaurant and a friend or family member was across the table and I was speaking to them like this, if the waiter would want to kick me out of the restaurant, then I need to stop. This is not how I speak to my mother or my best friend. If someone called me in tears, crying over something that might sound silly, but if this is how I would talk to them, then I need to maybe do some thinking.
That's actually an exercise that I have of one of my 110 tips is imagine that someone you really care about said exactly or did exactly the same thing, and what would you say to them?
Yeah,
And chances are they would never say what they say to themselves. So that's a very good exercise to realize that we have a double standard. And the happiness is less about what you have in your job and success. Not saying there's anything wrong with it, but happiness has more to do with how you talk to yourself.
yeah,
If you are nurturing, self-compassionate, and empathetic to others, you're generally going to be a happier person.
yeah,
People who are critical of themselves don't get better, they just get sadder.
yeah. I have started educating myself, I guess probably with the past year or two, maybe, but really getting to know my inner child. When I first heard the term inner child, I never really paid it much attention. Then after my trauma, I heard it and thought it sounded silly. And I was like, at this point, I'm in my 30s, like, there is no child about me anymore. And then I really started getting into it and was like, oh, I get it now. And so one of the things that has helped me is I have nieces and nephews from all the ages, right? Like from 4 months to 22.
Okay.
And so I always think of them like there are times that I'm driving the car and I'm pissed about something, or in the grocery store, or even just sitting at home alone and just get mad about something. And in my head, or even out loud, I've got some kind of David, you're such an idiot. David, like, why this? David. And then I've started to recognize that, oh, maybe that has something to do with my inner child. But what I found is that I was still saying your inner child's an idiot. Obviously, you don't learn anything because, and then I realized, like, what if my nephew had called me and I was on the phone with him, 16 years old, out exploring life, and called me to be a safe place and say, I may have screwed up. I did this. Am I going to say, you're an idiot? Shame on you. And so I started thinking when I had those moments of I think this might be my inner child acting up or speaking out or whatever, how would I talk to my niece or nephew? And it's really helped me.
Great rule of thumb. That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's really,
What you're doing is called something called cognitive diffusion. You're fusing your automatic associations, your automatic thoughts outside so you can look at them. And by observing it, when I actually talk to my nephew that way, you're diffusing it from your head. So you're looking at your thoughts instead of looking from those thoughts. And one is you're diffusing it. So you're not speaking from a place where you believe it. You're looking at and observing it. And that's really great. That's the first step to changing your thoughts. Because when you change your thoughts from unhealthy thoughts to healthier ones, you're going to feel better.
Yeah. Do you think, because I believe in toxic positivity, and I found myself,
I never heard of that term. Toxic positivity. What is
yeah,
that?
yeah, I found myself wanting to, like, to me, in my opinion, toxic positivity is like when I call someone and it comes with those cliche sayings of it could be worse, or it could be things will get better. All those are great and fine. But here now I'm struggling. And what you're doing is you're providing me with this toxic positivity. Things are going to be better, but I don't know how to make them better. I need your help on how to make them better. So until you can give me the guidance and I can find it on how to make it better, that positivity that you're giving me, I get it and I understand the intent, but it can be toxic.
I see what you mean. That's very interesting. I never heard of that term, but I think that fits very well.
Yeah.
We call it like silly thinking that, oh, things are going to get better. Okay, I'm going to try to explain what I mean. When people say things like, oh, you'll get over it, things will be better, how do they know?
Right.
Some things turn out terribly wrong. And that to me is silly.
Yeah.
When people say stupid things like that, it's silly. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean anything. Oh, I'll tell you what I really hate is everything turns out for the best. You
Oh,
know what? People die, and that is not turning out for the best. You might be faced with a real serious medical condition or a loved one. That isn't turning out the best. So I just call that silly. It's just silly. And you're calling it toxic positivity, which is probably a better term than my silly, because optimism is not thinking things are going to turn out the best, but a lot of people think it is. Oh, don't worry about it. It will get better. How do they know? But what I think is that even if things don't turn out, you still can. And a lot of times people focus on things turning out rather than them turning out.
yeah.
And no matter what happens, obviously, if you're terminally ill and you die, that doesn't turn out either. But some people face death with grace and reach that goal of acceptance through the grieving process. And some people never get past denial. Bad things definitely do happen, and to wish them away, I think is toxic positivity, or in my nomenclature, silliness. But I think that by being resilient and focusing on we still can turn out if we're lucky enough to survive it, and it still can be beautiful, even though altered in altered for life.
Yeah, I like that. And what I think is so interesting is where I call it toxic positivity. And you said that that might be a better word than silly. But I had the opposite thought. I was like, but silly is kind of like that more than toxic. So it's funny how I like your idea and you like
Well,
mine.
I think you're flexible, I'm flexible. We're looking at things in different ways. I never heard of that term, but it's, you know what? That is toxic because I really find it very irritating when people think, my mother used to say, don't worry about it until it happens. I don't care what your mother says. If I'm worried, I want to worry. There should not be a should that I shouldn't worry until it happens. And you know what? Some people drive more carefully because they're worried about getting an accident. And sometimes people who speed and they're weaving around cars aren't worried and they might more likely cause an accident. Don't take away my anxiety if I think it's helping me and this is where I'm at.
Yeah.
There's no timetable for grieving and there's no timetable for healing.
Yep. Yeah. That, stand by that. That it, and even when I realize that I do not have to put a timeline on anything, and it is okay for me to tell someone when they say, maybe you should be over it by now, it is okay for me to say, then you know what? You and I can no longer have this conversation because I'm not there yet and you're not seeing me and hearing me. And that is not a healthy place for me because I'm allowed to feel, I'm allowed to hurt, I'm allowed to go through all the steps, and there is not a timeline. It's like my grandmother uh, had, there was, okay, so my grandfather had passed away. And we're in the South. So we had, of course, the churches and the family all comes over. Everybody surrounds everybody for 3 days. And so my grandmother was, for 3 days, was on the go. She didn't have time to really mourn. About a year later, I had a friend that had a husband unexpectedly pass away. And I was telling my grandmother about it. And she said, call her on the fourth day. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And my grandmother said, she said, for 3 days, the house was full. I was entertaining. I was having to make arrangements. I was busy. But on the fourth day, the dust had settled for everybody. And I woke up and I made 2 cups of coffee. And that's when I realized your papa was gone.
That's
And
very good.
yeah, and so that's what taught me of everyone thinks your life has moved on. You gave yourself the 3 days. Now your life has moved on. And now you expect my life to have also moved on. But I'm the one missing out on, and I'm the one now making 2 cups of coffee, and there's one person in this big, cold, empty house.
Very cool. One of the hallmarks of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive means mind, behavior, is identifying the cognitive distortions, faulty ways of thinking that make us irrational. And when we are thinking irrationally, we're going to feel anxious or depressed. So what you were saying is a cognitive distortion of shoulding. When you should, that I should be over this by now. I have a friend who's going through a divorce, and her soon to be ex is saying, it's already been a while. You should be over it by now. The kids should be over it by now because they're grown ups. And that shoulding is such a dysfunctional, toxic expectation. So that's an example of a cognitive distortion, a lack of empathy, a lack of sensitivity. It shows a bit of narcissism when thinking that you should be, who says you should be? But a lot of times we should on ourselves. I shouldn't have said that. I should be further along in my life by now. I should have X, Y, and Z by now. I should be more like him or her by now. So we do that. That's one cognitive distortion. Another kind of cognitive distortion is fortune telling. I'll never get over this. How do you know you won't get over it? I'll never find someone else to love. How do you know that? So sometimes people have these fixed cognitive distortions that lead to very self-limiting beliefs, and that will make them stuck.
So, Judy, I would love to ask you this. Is there a healthy time period during one of the steps of grieving where it is okay to say, I'm never going to love again? Or do we need to always, from day one, say, well, maybe I will love again. Maybe I am going to get over this. Is it okay to have that moment of, would you consider that feeling sorry for yourself? You're going through a breakup?
You know what? If people can say that kind of thing to themselves, and maybe they need to go through that, but that's not going to get you out of it. That will get you stuck in it. But the more you can replace the fortune telling with something else. So I'll never get over this. What would be a more factual, not fortune telling way? Saying it's going to be hard for me to get over this. So the more rational we can think and we can train ourselves. And CBT principles are not something you like learn and then you're okay with. It's something you practice. It's like learning a new language. It's like exercising. If you want to walk or play tennis or go to the gym or whatever, if you go once, like in a month or two, and exercise, that's not going to help you. It has to be somewhat repeated to stay fit. And a lot of times we think, I should know that already. So I remember talking to a client, or actually different clients, really, when I think of it. And I would like whip out one of my worksheets and handouts from one of my books that maybe they saw 6 months before. And sometimes they get a little annoyed. It's like more with themselves than with me
Sure.
is, oh, I should have already gotten that. I say, there's some things you have to keep on practicing. It's not like I should know that and move on. This is a lifelong process to keep on reviewing. And that's why some people journal. That's why workbooks are very good, self-help workbooks, because it helps you keep on progressing and these principles can stay in your mind more clearly.
Yeah. I love that you said what you said about, because even when you change your thought process on things, you can still do it in what can maybe seem positive, but could still be toxic. For example, let's take a breakup or a divorce, right? And we say we're never going to love again. And my thing was that, well, so do I tell myself that, yes, absolutely, you will love again, but that is from like 0 to 100. And
That's
so
also fortune telling. How do you know?
oh, exactly. And so to me, that of course you're gonna love again, David, is toxic because it's almost trying to forget about the middle parts.
Right. You stick to the facts,
Mm,
not your interpretations. And the facts are, I hope to learn skills from this breakup so that I'll be in a healthier or happier, more long-standing relationship
yeah.
if that's what I want. You just stick to like the facts and not your interpretations. So to say, oh, yes, I will love again, how do you know? That's another fortune telling.
Yeah.
It might be hard. Like I know I think of the songs that I grew up with. Blood, Sweat, and Tears. You make me so very happy. Guess what? That's a very codependent song because if you can make me happy, you can make me miserable, you can make me suicidal. Anybody who can make someone anyway, that's not very healthy. There's a double edge. Ray Charles song, I can't stop loving you. What do you mean I can't? It's hard to stop loving you. That's factual. You have to untie the knots. And it's interesting that second line in that song, probably you don't even know that song,
Oh,
right?
no, I
Do you-
love that song.
Okay, all right. I thought you were looking at me like, what is she talking about?
No,
Uh,
I'm looking at you like that because I'm like, oh my God, you're so right. And all these songs going through my head that I sing all the time.
right,
I'm like, oh crap, what have I been putting in my head?
right. So Ray Charles song, I can't stop loving you. The second verse, second right after that, I made up my mind. So it's like you're in control of your thoughts. So maybe you wouldn't make a gold record, but I choose to stop loving you, or it's hard for me to stop loving you. It's difficult. I'm striving to stop loving you, but I can't. So just those self-limiting beliefs that we talk to ourselves about can keep us paralyzed.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of songs like that.
Oh gosh, I just had one come to mind while you were talking. So my parents are divorced and I've never known my mom and dad to be together. They're both wonderful, loving parents. I was so blessed. I never heard them talk bad about each other.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah, like they're amazing people. I remember when I was a kid, my dad was listening to the radio and there was an old George Jones song that came on. He stopped loving her today. And it is about a man that dies and he was mourning his wife or ex-wife up until the day he died. And that's the day that he stopped loving her because he died. And I remember to this day, I'm 43 years old. I was probably told that when I was 7. And my dad told me, he said, I want this song played at my funeral because that's the day I'll stop loving your mother. And it has always haunted me. Now, it is a very romantic story, but the surface of it can be romantic. But when you think about the mental health of it, maybe you should stop loving her well before you die.
Interesting. Wow. Very interesting. There was a song, which probably you don't know, but You might. Engelbert Humperdinck was famous back in the 70s, 80s, and he had this song, oh, I'm blocking on the name, but there goes my reason for living, there goes my everything. When I was a teenager, I thought, oh my God, that is so romantic. I didn't realize it was a crazy codependent song. And what I thought was romantic is like a Romeo and Juliet kind of thing. I can't live without it. I romanticized that. As I got older and I went to clinical psychology graduate school, I realized and learned more about CBT. I realized, you know what, that was actually a very sick song.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then a lot of country western songs now, there's a lot of I'm a victim rather than a victor mentality.
Uh, oh my gosh. So I'm going to start playing this game with myself now because I love female country music. And I love like those heartbreaking ballads. And I always tell people, you will know when I'm the happiest. The sadder the song, the happier I am.
You know what? A lot of people, that's very interesting you said that. A lot of people love sad songs, including me. I love sad songs because to me it tugs at my heartstrings.
Uh-huh.
Depth to it. It makes you feel.
Yeah.
Things that make you feel can make you feel good, even if it's sad, but because it
Yeah.
makes you feel and it resonates. And you know, you're not alone.
Yeah.
It's something that kind of relates. Interesting you said that.
Yeah. And so the game that I'm wanting to play with myself now when I listen to my music is this a codependent song? What does this actually mean? Because I haven't thought about that. Like I had even just mentioned to you, like the song that I was talking about was a very romantic story. Now, I do believe that you can have these songs and these romanticized stories of I can't live without you if you are able to separate what is healthy and not healthy, right? If I'm able to say that this is just Romeo and Juliet story versus making it my life and what I live by.
It's good to just realize that some songs just reflect the way we rationalize things. And as a society, a lot of times we think something is rational when it really isn't. And what CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, does, it helps you be more aware of the quality of your thoughts and how they affect the quality of your life. It's not to bash the song.
Right.
It's not to, but it's interesting. Our collective society often thinks that's perfectly rational. There goes my reason for living. There goes my everything. Just like I thought it was the most romantic song ever until I realized it was the most codependent song ever. I didn't know, but,
I know. Now
and
I'm like, okay, in therapy, this Wednesday, I'm going to talk about these 5 songs because they have to mean something about me. Like this, but what I also love about this conversation, Judith, is the songs that I've listened to for years. When I listen to them again, they're going to be brand new and different because now I'm going to be listening to them with a different set of lenses. With this in mind, I'm kind of excited about it.
interesting that you mentioned lenses because I'm really into analogies and metaphors.
Same.
And I use the metaphor of having smudgy glasses. When people think with a lot of cognitive distortions and unhealthy thinking patterns, it's like having smudgy glasses. We don't see things clearly.
Yeah,
It's interesting that you use that metaphor yourself.
yeah. So, although I feel we could have another hour-long conversation about music and its codependency, which I almost want to create a podcast about that. Like, I'm stuck on this, Miss Judy. That I think that is so interesting. But you have mentioned CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, and given us little tidbits of your book here and there. Start wherever you want. You had also mentioned that you're the author of multiple books. This one is just your newest one, correct? So,
I have 11 books.
oh wow,
Um,
okay, yeah. Start wherever you want, but tell us about your books.
you could look on Amazon author page and Judith Belmont, and you can see the books. Every single book, some are workbooks and they have big, they're big. Like this one is probably the meatiest one. This is the one that I just wrote. It's a lot of pages. When I was writing it on the computer from my publisher, I didn't know how big it was going to be. Uh, But then I have other books from other publishers, such as New Harbinger and W. Norton, and other. This is from my mental health publisher, Pessy. And some are just small books like self-help workbook or self-care workbook. The common thread, I also am the author of 2 therapeutic card decks, the anxiety and stress management card deck. So you just get 50 something cards of different tips that are just easy, and you could use like a inspiration a day.
Yeah,
But everything has to do with life skills and learning how to undo toxic ways of thinking and behaving, and learning some skills, because it's one thing if you realize your thinking is toxic or it's not as healthy as you would like, what do you do? And so that's always been my forte, is trying to make it easy for people to figure out, okay, what actually do you do to think more clearly? And some of it is in short versions, like little affirmations that maybe you have, or things called coping cards. So they're reminders of what you need to do to get rid of some of that toxic thinking and serve as a guide. There's so many different things that people can actually learn skills, because it's like learning a new language. Some people, when they grew up, learned Pig Latin. It might have been a nonsense language. Maybe there was a lot of irrationality. And it's almost like you have to learn a healthier language, but you still have that accent. People who have been in this country for years might be 70, 80 years old, but they still have an accent from when they moved from wherever back 70 years ago. So we don't want to get rid of the accent. We just don't want it to dominate us if it's no longer the healthiest language for us.
yeah, absolutely. Judy, one of the best things that happened in my healing process is post-it notes.
Okay.
I would write things. So I had some brain injury, I had some memory loss. Luckily, it all came back, but it took some time. But I was finding that putting something positive on my mirror, something that someone said to me. And so I had my mirror covered just like this. There was enough space for me to brush my teeth.
And you didn't even know that was a CBT technique.
Yeah, no clue.
Either it's called coping cards, but they could be in the form of post-it notes,
Yeah,
just reminders of your worth, reminders of affirmations, reminders of things you want to remember
yeah,
to ground you during, so that when you are feeling weaker, you have something to use as a recourse to help get you back.
yeah. And to tell you how much pride I took to this and how much they meant to me in my recovery is adding a new post it every day or 2 days or three a day, whatever it was. Eventually, they're going to be covered in toothpaste because I brushed my teeth, I was spitting. And because my face took a lot of the impact of my trauma, and I have this ugly scar under my eye, and this tooth got broken.
My God.
And so when I would wake up in the morning and I would go to brush my teeth, I would see the scar and I would see
Mm.
the broken tooth. So I started my day brushing my teeth and starting my day being reminded of my trauma. I ended my day brushing my teeth. So I ended my day being reminded of my trauma. And so I started getting Botox in my scar and having the scar popped out. I no longer do that. This scar is a badge of honor at this point.
I don't see it. So
Um,
it's
yeah,
noticeable.
yeah, it has withered away a little bit just naturally on its own. Now, I did go get veneers and I did treat myself on my 40th birthday and got veneers. So the broken tooth is gone. But when it was time to, the window was so full of post-its and it was time to take them down because they were steamed and toothpaste. I couldn't throw them away. So I shadow boxed them.
Oh, that's
And
great.
because they were a huge part of my recovery. And all the way down to just a reminder of David, remember to get your lunch out of the refrigerator. David, you can hug yourself. David, it is okay. If you need a minute to cry, David, that is okay. Just what would seem so silly to some people was so empowering to me. And
Yeah,
literally,
that's a great
a
example.
post-it covered in toothpaste. I couldn't throw it away. I spent money shadow boxing them because they are part of why I'm here today.
Huh? That's a great story. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, no, thanks for listening. Sorry I went on a tangent, but I just
Ah,
I just
great
think
progress.
I think they're
You're
so powerful.
absolutely. You're like my case in point.
Yeah,
What I was saying is how important these quote coping cards are. You had them in the form of post-it notes. People have the old-fashioned note cards, or they have little things on it, screensavers on the computer, or little notes on their computer.
yeah,
It comes in all forms, but it just helps ground you and remind you of your worth.
yeah, yeah.
And I had said before I was into metaphors, talking about worth, one of my favorite activities I'm into in all my books, and also when I would do my speaking to live audiences like workplace wellness conferences, things like that, I would take a bill, like a $20 bill, and I asked people what it's worth, $20. And then I'd crush it and I'd pass it around. I said, don't tear it, but do whatever you want with it. People would step on it, fold it, unfold it, whatever. And then it would come back to me. I said, okay, what is this worth? Still $20. But a lot of times people think what they've gone through, it makes them less worthy. And your worth never changes, even though maybe there's been some assaults on your self-esteem. We still have that worth just as we were as a newborn child. That never changes.
But it also reminds me of this analogy that I've seen on the social medias, kind of like what you're saying about the $20 bill. It doesn't change the value. But then there was one, and you may have seen it too, where they'll take like a piece of paper and it's a gorgeous, beautiful piece of paper, write notes on, but then you wad it up and you, when you unravel it, it's got all the wrinkles. So yeah, it's still there. Yeah, it's still whole, but it's damaged. And I know that there are completely different meanings to it, but as far as
I
yours,
think it actually goes in. Okay, so it's very interesting to use that example. So I used to love Abraham Tversky's books. When Did the Good Things Start? He used Charlie Brown cartoons and he would had a relationship with Charles Schultz, and he was a psychiatrist. He was actually a Hasidic psychiatrist, and he founded the Gateway Centers in Pittsburgh for a recovery for substance abuse. He was amazing. He wrote, I don't know how many books, like probably triple that I've written. And he was amazing. And I actually had him speak in Pennsylvania where I used to live. And he came for the weekend and he was a speaker in a couple different forums. He was amazing. So we had a dinner for him at my house. And so I said to him, if you've had trauma and you've had things happen, then can you actually ever really get over that or something like that? I don't remember exactly what I said. He
sure.
said, you have a piece of paper? I said, yeah. I gave him a piece of paper. Now, this is Abraham Tversky. Unfortunately, he died of COVID a few years ago, but he was, I think, around 90 or something like that. He lived a long life, but cut short by COVID, unfortunately. He was an amazing man. And I gave him a piece of paper. It was in my kitchen. He folded the piece of paper and he like reinforced it. And then he said, you see that crease? That crease is always going to be there, but it still is a whole piece of paper.
Yeah.
That's the same as whatever you carry, you can still unfold it, but doesn't mean that crease won't be there. And I thought that was a very good visualization. And you basically just said pretty much the same thing. That was a great visualization, but it reminded me of my experience with Abraham Tversky.
That's amazing. Yeah, like that just really hit me so hard when I saw that on social media, because I was like, you're right. Like, I'm still whole and I've got creases now. And
We all have creases. We all have creases.
100%. But like we've always talked about with this episode, is it's all in what we do with it now. And so that's what so my bathroom is my safe place. My bathroom is my favorite room. When my attempted murder happened, I found myself feeling the safest in a bathroom because there was one window and I could see it. It was big enough for me to not feel closed in, but it was small enough for me to see every corner. I felt very secure in there. I would listen to music. I would put things on my mirror. I would sit down and cry. And one of the things that I challenged myself to with therapy and learned is, okay, so maybe tomorrow is when I open the door and I step into my bedroom, until finally it got to where my entire house was now a safe place again. But that bathroom, that place just became very therapeutic for me, even still this day. When I'm showering and getting ready I love being in my bathroom. And that's where my brain starts thinking, because it has become this safe place to me. And when I'm brushing my teeth, whether there's post-its on my mirror or not, I still see them there. And it's that muscle memory, right? Like, even if there's nothing, because my bathroom is my private one. I have the guest bathrooms that people can use. So my private one, I can have the post-its and stuff on that we wouldn't have in our regular bathroom. But even when they're not there, I still see them.
They probably would like it, your guess. Huh?
You're 100% correct. But it is so amazing to me how, like, I could be brushing my teeth and I'm reading the post-its when the post-its aren't there. Or I'm looking down, like brushing my teeth, and I'm quoting the post-its as if I'm reading them. And I don't have to look at them anymore. It's that muscle memory now. And those reminders, the smallest reminder of just, hey, David, like, maybe give yourself a hug before you walk out into the world today, is big.
Awesome.
I've really enjoyed this conversation.
I have too. You're
I took notes.
Conversationalist and good interviewer. Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you so much. And we could be on to something, Judy, because I took note that I want to start listening to songs and documenting them on the codependency, the things. This could be a whole new podcast that we may have you as a guest on, and we discuss these songs. Like, I literally took note of that. I think that is so interesting.
You can think of them in terms of victor or victim songs.
Yeah. So interesting. What a lovely conversation.
Awesome. My website is Belmont Wellness, and you spell it BELMONT, Belmont Wellness. And I have a lot of free handouts and worksheets, and I'll have this podcast, other podcasts. I have self-help quizzes, so you can get a taste of what's in my books just by downloading some things for these free resources in my website.
Miss Judy, thank you so much. This was such a lovely conversation and such a wonderful way to end my night. So thank you so much for that. Remember, healing is a journey, not a destination.
You are not alone in this. It's okay to take your time, explore different perspectives, and find what resonates with you. Healing takes courage, and we believe in you.
Together, we can enjoy the ride.